Hello everyone, welcome back to the Crash MotoGP Podcast, and we are here for the final season preview of 2024. As you know, 24 points separates Pecco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin at the top of the championship. We're racing in Barcelona and we have it all confirmed now, and it's simply down to just waiting for the track action to begin and for the title to be decided. Joining me, Jordan Moreland, is Lewis Duncan and Pete McLaren. And Pete, it's went by really quickly this season, but we've finally made it to the end. Titles up for grabs. What do we think for this weekend ahead?
Yeah, as you say, John, it's 20th round has come by quite quickly, really, isn't it, given all these races? But yeah, here we are, not where we thought we'd be, not at Valencia, but at Barcelona. So, but as you say, chance of history for Martin, isn't it? The first guy potentially to win the championship on a satellite bike in the MotoGP era, if you like, the four-stroke era. Came close last year and lost out to Pecco, but clearly the point situation is on his side going into this weekend. So all eyes on him. I think Saturday he has the chance to wrap it up, doesn't he? If he wins the sprint, there's lots of sort of points permutations, yep. But if he wins the sprint, that's an easy way to look at it. He'll win the championship, and obviously he'll be desperate to do that when he avoid that big pressure Sunday showdown, get out the way on Saturday. So with qualifying in the morning, starting from there, it's going to be a massive Saturday, I think.
Yeah, it is. And Lewis, what do you think, looking at the opposite side, what's Pecco Bagnaia got to do heading into this weekend? Does he just have to just play his own game, or does he try to get involved to try and mix it up a little bit?
I think he needs to do what he did in Malaysia, which is back against the wall, go guns blazing, and just, you can't really be tactical when it comes to Martin, because as we saw in Malaysia, the two of them were such a cut above. Maybe he can slow up the pace this time, like we discussed, in another podcast. Maybe he can try and use qualifying to bring a few people up the grid, maybe get Marquez up there, Bastianini up there. But there's not really too many cards for Pecco to play. He's just to go out there and do his own race and kind of hope for the best. He can, if he can get a bit of help, great. I think, I think it'll be unlikely, just given on the form we've seen. And we talk about Marc and Bastianini, they've got their own battle in the championship to think about as well. So they've, there's that, and they've got really important tests coming up after that race. So there's also this element, they're not really going to put everything on the line, are they, to help someone win a championship when they've got, new bikes to be trying, on Tuesday. So there's Pecco's up against it. He's just got to go out and do what he can do and hope for the best, really.
Yeah. Pete, who do you think goes into the weekend the more relaxed? I know it's obvious it could be Bagnaia, but he has a lot more to think about, I think. If it sounds sort of strange, but he needs a lot more things to go his way. Martin kind of just needs to be behind him. It's really simple, but in these situations, it doesn't usually play out like that. There's always something thrown in there. You think about previous championship fights we've had, think of 2006, for example. Valentino Rossi's job was really simple. He just had to essentially do what he was doing. He was fast all weekend, and it just changed on that Sunday morning. Martin just needs to keep the focus, doesn't he?
He does, but as you say, Jordan, it's pressure, isn't it? And it does. It's not just to the rider, on the whole team as well. On the Pramac team, the Ducati team, and Pecco, they've been in this situation more times, and they've got a bit more experience of it. Martin's handled it fantastically well, and the team, in fairness. But now is crunch time, isn't it? Now is where it's really, it's going to be decided one way or the other. And so this is where we'll see it. And it's interesting, as you say, how will that play on people? On his riding, will he ride a bit tighter or not? Will he be able to just keep this almost bulletproof sort of calmness that he had, in recent rounds that's put him in this really sort of confident position? I think for Pecco, as you say, his goal has just got to be, firstly, get it to Sunday. Try and get it to Sunday. The point situation is so far in Martin's favour that really it's going to take something unusual to happen. But I think that's a realistic goal, is just try to at least delay it till the end of the season. We know there's going to be cold temperatures. We know turn one has seen more than a few incidents over the year at Barcelona. Something strange. It's been a strange season anyway. Something strange could happen on the Sunday. But first he's got to get there. There's no point having fantastic race pace on Friday if the championship is decided on Saturday. So exactly. I think maybe Pecco will have an emphasis on the single time attack, let's say, on the Friday, more than before. We've known him as sort of somebody who works on race pace a lot, doesn't he, on the Friday? Maybe he'll switch that up, put the pressure on Martin, as we've been saying, the pressure. P1 in FP1, start at the top. Pramac will surely say to Martin, look, it doesn't matter, it was a new tyre, but still, just seeing Pecco in front of him, it just all adds to it, doesn't it? And I think there's, as you guys have said, there's not much that really Pecco can do, but little things like that, but potentially is really all that he can do at this stage.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because we're going to a Grand Prix that we've already been to, Lewis, much earlier in the year, and obviously much hotter temperatures. Do you think that both of them will look at that as a sort of guide? Because Bagnaia got the better of Martin in, when was it, May, June time, and I think it was one of Martin's weakest weekends, honestly, of the season so far. When you look back at it, he struggled a bit in the sprint, and he finished second in the Grand Prix, but it's different this time of year, obviously, because of temperature and just the different emphasis on the championship at the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it was that point of the season where Martin's championship kind of looked like it was starting to unravel a bit. I think, Pecco went on a really solid run. There was a couple of, double victory weekends for him, in that kind of cluster of sort of 4 or 5 races. And I think we all sort of thought heading towards the summer break, especially after Germany, that it was kind of in Bagnaia's hands now. The momentum was there. He'd taken the lead in the championship. Martin, we thought at the time, Ducati's, we're going to let Martin win this, and take the number 1 plate to Aprilia. That hasn't transpired as such, but Martin's had such a bulletproof second half to the season that I think what happened earlier this year kind of is not irrelevant, but it shouldn't dictate their kind of thought processes coming into the race weekend. The grip conditions at Barcelona are generally quite bad, so maybe in colder conditions it might just be a little bit more favourable in terms of that, because when we get really hot conditions, it's the track's really, really, really low grip. The last time we had a race in Barcelona at kind of a similar time of year was 2020, and the end of September, and the conditions were a bit colder, and it wasn't such a crash-filled race from memory. There was only 4 or 5 retirements compared to sometimes we see double digits at Barcelona in the summer. I think as well, from a purely kind of looking solely at the championship as it is now, looking at what happened in Barcelona will do neither of them any favours, because if you try and approach it like you did before, you're probably going to get stung by that. So they've kind of just got to look at it as they've never been here before. It's a brand new race, brand new everything. What happened last week in Sepang hasn't happened either. It's very much just focused session by session, lap by lap, make sure you're hitting your marks and take it from there. Martin obviously is the one that needs to make sure he doesn't get wrapped up in any kind of pressure wars and anything like that. He's the one more than anything that has to just get on with his job, and that's it.
Yeah, well, I don't think Pecco Bagnaia would want to emulate his sprint from Barcelona earlier this year. As you know, he crashed out of the lead on the last lap, and if that happened again, Martin's champion, so he is, if he's in the point scoring places, no matter where he is. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective looking back, say, last year in this title fight with both of them. Obviously, Martin was in the position that Bagnaia is in. Pete, how do you think Bagnaia's approach works? Because you look at Martin last year, he was aggressive and he was trying to get inside Bagnaia's head, but personally I can't see Bagnaia trying things the way Martin did, like for example last year in Valencia. I don't think Bagnaia will do that, but it'd be interesting to see if he did do it.
It would, yeah. I mean, we all wondered, would he try to go slow a bit at Sepang last weekend, and he made clear that he didn't think that was sporting to do it, but he did sort of open the door to maybe towing other riders, so that could be interesting. But again, and I come back to what Lewis said at the start, these guys, the two of them have been so much ahead of the others on pace that really the first thing they've got to be is at the front, because if Martin's, top of the timesheets and Pecco's 5th or 6th, there's no point towing other riders that are going to put you even further backwards, is there? So, and if you're Martin, the way you would sort of combat if Pecco is at the front and towing others is you jump in behind him as well, don't you? So you make sure that you're in that queue and you're going to get towed along. So I think inevitably we'll see some sort of tactics come to play. As you say, Martin certainly seems to be quite happy to sort of pull in behind Pecco, doesn't he, in practice, and just try and shake things up a bit. And Pecco hasn't been having anything of it, has he, in recent rounds? But let's see what happens this weekend. And of course, the teammates. That's the other thing that will come into play there. I mean, I think Morbidelli must be at the worst position of anybody. I mean, given that great friends with Pecco, staying at Ducati next year, but obviously teammate to Martin. And if there is any kind of go slow tactics at all, whether that's deliberate for Pecco's side or even just saving the tyres, if it turns into a bit of a tyre race even in the sprint, and there's some long corners, aren't there, at Barcelona where it's easy to use up the tyres. The normal defence is to send the teammate, isn't it, into battle, a bit like, of course, Danny Pedrosa did for Marc Marquez in 2013 when Lorenzo was slowing things down. But imagine if you're in Morbidelli's position. I mean, that just must be, that'll be a difficult one. Bastianini, I mean, he said, I'm racing for myself. He's leaving, obviously, Ducati at the end of the year. But I think you can sort of bet that Ducati will have a word with him and say, look, if you do give a position to Pecco that helps him in the championship, we will at least pay your win bonus or something like that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? There'll certainly be. It's hard to believe there won't be some discussion around the other riders, and Marc Marquez, as you guys have mentioned as well. Low grip. It's he's now in a much stronger position than he was in May with the Ducati. Low grip is where he feels at his best. So potentially we could see him up there. He made some good comeback rides, didn't he, in May, from qualifying way down, didn't even make Q2. So if he can get a decent qualifying and he's up there, Aleix as well, potentially in his final race, if the Aprilia performs. There's a lot of other riders that could come into play.
Yeah, that was going to be my question for you, Lewis. Outside of the Ducatis, this is the perfect track for Aprilia because they have been really strong around here, and they were strong here obviously back in May and previous seasons. Aleix Espargaro's final Grand Prix, he wants to help out his mate Jorge, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think Pecco alluded to this in Sepang that, Aleix goes strong here. He'll definitely want to help Jorge out. I mean, we'll see. The Aprilia performance has been so kind of unpredictable, really, the second half of the season. You'd like to think that maybe lower, slightly lower, cooler conditions, slightly maybe better grip would help the Aprilia. But, as we saw in Aragon when it was reasonably cold, low grip, they really, really struggled. So, it's hard to kind of see where they factor in. You've got to think about KTM as well, and Pedro Acosta. It's his last chance to win a race as a rookie this year. There's a lot of guys going out there as well who have got scores to settle. The Yamahas will be looking to build on what they did in Sepang. Honda will be looking to try and get their best result of the year if they can. Before quite an intense winter. You've got other people leaving manufacturers and leaving teams who want to have good results. So. Yeah, there's lots of little subplots going on that could have a bearing on the championship. As we saw in Sepang, not even results, it's red flags. Things like that could have a real big impact. We saw a couple of guys didn't have fresh tyres for that restart. That could very well be the same for those championship guys if there's a red flag on Sunday for whatever reason, which, the probability of Barcelona is reasonably high. Especially those first couple of corners on the first lap, they are a bit of a choke point, and we have seen accidents where we have had to stop the race. So there's just all these little elements that could come into it, and that's not to say that touch wood, it doesn't happen. But if one of them gets an injury on a practice crash, or there's just everything. The bikes are at the end of the season, they're at the end of their lifespan. We know they'll all have a new engine, but mechanics are tired, mistakes happen. There's so many variables that can be thrown into this that one of 100 things could have an impact on this championship.
Yeah, it's true, and that point you make about the mechanics and the teams, Pete, we've seen it. I think 2022, obviously with Bagnaia's first title showdown as such with Quartararo, and you've seen the tension for Davide Tardozzi, all the mechanics. They looked really nervous. Obviously, they got it last year as well, and you grow with experience. But it's a different position now for Bagnaia because he's not defending; he has to attack compared to where he has been. You mentioned at the start with Pramac. Do you think they're able to cope with the strain of knowing that it's so close? And on it in as well, it's their last race with Ducati before they make the move to Yamaha. So it's a big weekend for Pramac, isn't it?
Yeah, massive, as you say, massive. And you do wonder if that's almost also working in their favour. It's almost become like a focal point that, look, we might not be here again, or we don't know when we'll be in this position again, whether you're Martin, whether you're Pramac, from all angles of that team, if you like. And it's almost so, let's make the most of this chance because we don't know when or if it will happen again. Whether it's a positive or a negative, I'm not sure. It could also help to focus everybody. I think it's good that there's been this weekend off because the mechanics are was speaking to one team manager, and they've been on the road for 7 weeks. They didn't fly back to Europe during that one weekend off between the two sets of flyaways. So they've been, the teams have been on the road for 7 weeks. So they've had a weekend at home, a bit of a refresh. They're back on the European time zone. They're not having to fly overseas and have all the jet lag and everything else. So I think that in itself, the mechanics will be fresh in that sense. But certainly, yeah, it's, as we say, it's pressure, isn't it? Suddenly things that you do automatically, you start double thinking it or things like that, isn't it? It's what makes these kinds of winner takes all or high pressure situations, these finales so sort of interesting, is that this is it. There is no second chance after this weekend. So everyone's got to get everything right. As we say, Martin has handled it very well. I think Pramac have handled it very well. You might say the only chink was that diving into the pits at Misano with a few drops of rain, but other than that, they've been solid. But it's now that counts, isn't it? As you guys are saying, and Lewis said, there's so many things that can happen. They're going to have to also think on their feet. Also things like, do they tell Martin during the race on the pit board where Pecco is or not? Or at what stage might that distract him? At what stage do you tell him? Do you tell him halfway through the sprint when things are maybe settled down a bit? Do you have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C? There's all these extra things that come into a title deciding round like this. And it's going to be a big weekend, obviously. Yeah.
Massive, yeah. And Pete talked about that mistake that Martin made at the first Misano race, and the question for both of you, I'll let you answer first, Lewis. For both riders, over this whole season, where do you think their crucial mistake has come from? It's more leaning towards Bagnaia, obviously, because his mistakes of 8 DNFs in there, and Martin's only had the 3. Obviously, he made the mistake in Indonesia, but he remounted in the sprint, and he finished 10th. But if you could pick a mistake for both riders and when we look after the season's finish and go, that was the one where it cost him, where would it be?
Yeah, I mean, for Pecco, I think it's that second Misano race when, there was this tyre problem, and then really third was the best he could hope for. And a race as well where his teammate did him a solid by taking 5 points away from Martin. That was 16 extra points that would have went to Pecco's total, which would have meant his gap coming into Barcelona's 8 points. All of a sudden, that changes the dynamic of the weekend completely. Pecco's got more opportunities. Martin's got more pressure on him. You have to think of the gap being narrower, ahead of that Grand Prix in Malaysia. Martin's not going to be fighting as hard as he did. This is what we talk about when we talk about, the points lost. It's not so much, the result as such. It's how that result then impacts the way that these guys go racing. For Martin, there's been a couple of quite big ones. I think probably crashing at the lead of Germany. That extra 5 points is 29 points again for his tally coming into this weekend. And again, all of a sudden it changes things. He just needs a couple of points to make sure that his tally is over 26 going into Sunday, and that's the championship over. It's still in a favourable position for him. But that's 5 crucial points, and that was, of course, his second crash out the lead of a Grand Prix that season. So I think Germany, though, will definitely be the one that will probably kind of stick in his mind most, more so than the Misano thing, if he does go on to lose this championship.
Pete, where do you think their big mistakes have come for the both of them?
Yeah, I think Germany's a good call there, just because it was so late towards the end of the race, wasn't it? Literally just need another lap, wasn't it? I think. And for Pecco, again, Misano obviously in the Grand Prix as well. The Sunday mistakes obviously count a lot more. I think also if you look at it from the point of view of they were pretty much equal with about half a dozen rounds to go, wasn't it? So therefore you could almost, to a certain extent, forget everything that had come before, and you just say, okay, we've got a 6-round championship, we're almost equal, go for it. And for me, obviously, the last mistake by Pecco and Sepang is what has put this, it's put it out of his reach.
Yeah.
Himself, let's say, by his own results, but again, that was a sprint race, and if you are going to make a mistake, it's not as big. But I think, to a certain degree, you could also say that the last mistake, just because it has handed Martin this big points lead heading into the final round. But who knows? Could we see one more? Might there be one more twist left in this championship of mistakes, as Pecco called it earlier in the year?
Yeah. They're both, when you talk about, as you both mentioned there, about the mistakes, I think the Misano one for Martin, for me, it was at a point of the season where I forget what the championship points gap was, And the way that Grand Prix came about and how it finished, and Marc Marquez went on to win it, and I do think that Martin probably could have won that race, or would have been ahead of Bagnaia if he didn't just dive in and make it. You could see that famous picture now, obviously, when you see him looking over the wall and he's thinking, why are they all not coming in with me? That one for me, yes, he still got a point at the end of it. He finished 15th. For me, it sticks out as the mistake that if it does cost him, he'll probably think about it more than anything, because obviously he crashed to the lead in Jerez. He crashed out of a sprint, I think, was it in Italy? And then he crashed out of the lead in Germany, which, as you both mentioned, it came very late on in the race, and it was pretty much the exact same as this RF crash, only it happened to the worst possible time for him. But yeah, that mistake for me in Misano, I think it's more just the iconicness of it, where you see him looking over and thinking, what have I done here? You can see it almost in him. And then for Bagnaia, as I said to you before, I think the Misano Grand Prix, the second one, I think he didn't accept that he needed to settle for the points, because he kind of got away with the tyre not working at the start, and I think he wanted maybe to show that he could try and win that race. I don't know what it is. He had so much great pace in that middle of the end part of the race for the mistake, and as you both said, Bastianini done him a favour in the end, so it would have been really close in terms of the points. So yeah, I think Bagnaia will look back after everything's done, if he doesn't win this championship, and think, yeah, that Misano mistake maybe actually cost me it, because it changes the dynamic for the flyaways too, doesn't it? If he's closer, could have got completely different results. And yeah, that's the beauty of talking about these mistakes. We don't know how they could have changed things, but we'll know at the end of the year when we see the points who's going to be the champion. Whoever has the most, they deserved it, and that's the way I look at it. And the battle for third, there's a different sort of play on that. As you both said, Bastianini's leaving Ducati at the end of the season. If he gets told, yeah, you have to kind of help Pecco, I believe Marc Marquez won't be doing any of that. He'll just be trying to win races, as we know. And Lewis, how do you think that plays out between those two? Because a GP24 versus GP23, Bastianini should be favourite, but Marc Marquez is Marc Marquez, isn't it? He just wants to have the best possible results for leaving Gresini, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's interesting, but I think more from Ducati management point of view is they would probably want Marc to finish in front of Bastianini, because you don't really want to have a situation where Martin wins the championship, Bastianini, you don't want a situation where you're the two guys you've deemed not good enough are beating the guys that you've, kind of concurrently that you've decided to keep. I think from Marquez's point of view, finishing third is important, because if Pecco then loses the championship, it's sort of this kind of thing of, well, we go into the winter looking at, well, how did Pecco lose this championship, and how did Marc, gain so much in a season on an old kind of aging bike as well across the season of these past few rounds? We know that the bike has lost even more performance than it even, had at the start of the season relative to the GP24. So, I think kind of controversially, I think Pecco losing the championship would be favourable for Marc, regardless of what he says publicly, because, if you're going into a situation, you're going into a factory team where, the guy who was champion lost the championship, he's got a point to prove. There's a bit more pressure on him, because there's obviously a lot of expectation on Marc to jump on a factory bike and go just better straight away.
Yeah.
And we talk about the championship decider and the Grand Prix and all the rest of it. We have got this test on Tuesday, which arguably is much more interesting, from a longer term perspective than whatever happens this weekend in the Grand Prix, because, if Marc goes well on that factory bike straight away, it is, even just leading Pecco in the timesheets, having also then, if Pecco's lost the championship and Marc's third in the championship, it creates this little dynamic that's going to eat away in the back of Pecco's mind over the year, and obviously all of us journalists are going to be writing about it over the next few months. And this is, for me, that's maybe the more interesting part of this weekend than the championship decider, because unfortunately, if the championship is won on Sunday, by Monday afternoon we've forgotten about it, because we're all looking towards the test, and it was much the same last year, which is, maybe we need to stop having this test after the final round of a championship, or maybe they need to write into the rules that the test is going to be there if there isn't a championship decider, or I don't know. But yeah, I think there's that battle for third might not mean much to them, to the championship on paper, but I think deep down for the two riders it is very important for a number of reasons.
Yeah, it's actually it's a lot of good points because it's just Marquez says he doesn't care about finishing third sort of thing, but if he's a GP23 beating a GP24, that's a big deal, surely, isn't it? And Bastianini, I don't know if he has bonuses in his contract that would pay out. I imagine he does if he's top three in the championship. It's interesting with those two because Bastianini's at more of he gets scrutinised a bit more because he's obviously Bagnaia's teammate, and Marquez can get given a free pass. You can go wherever you want, sort of thing. But I don't know who I want to be this weekend because it's only 1 point separating them. It's it's an interesting little battle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And of course, Bastianini gave away a few points back in May, didn't he? When he ignored the long lap penalty. So if we're talking about mistakes and points lost, it could come back to haunt him if he does want that third in the championship. As you say, he'll get there'll be a bonus for that. And I think for Gresini, or Marquez, it'll be more the Gresini team that will be looking at that third place. That'll be more for them when it probably sponsor bonuses and things like that, which would be very welcome at a satellite team. We've heard that some of the GP24 riders claim that there's better traction from the 23. So again, if it is low grip this weekend, let's see if the guys on the 23 can be up there, and that Marquez can sort of mix it up with everyone else. But yeah, I think also, as you guys have said, there is a bit of a they've picked Marquez over Martin and Bastianini. So, yeah, if Martin obviously is out of reach of Marquez, potentially out of reach of Pecco as well. But if Marquez can at least beat Bastianini, the guy he's replacing, then that does save a bit of pride there, doesn't it? Because Ducati, they are losing quite a few of their young stars, aren't they? So at least if they sign the guy, okay, obviously Marquez is on the year-old bike, but at least if their future rider beats the guy they've got now, that'll help a bit, won't it?
So, yeah, will do. And here's just a question. At the end of the year, we look back at obviously the big transfer market moves that we had. Do you ever think, Lewis, that there was ever a chance we could have kept Martin, Marquez, Bagnaia all in the same manufacturer? Do you think it was never really possible?
I think if Ducati hadn't have been as stubborn as it was in terms of who it was going to give factory support to, and Marquez had gotten the factory bike at Gresini. I think possibly, there's contractual things in there that the contract dictated that Pramac would get the exclusive, but Ducati could have sweetened that deal quite substantially, I think, if they played the cards right. But yeah, Marc's power play was Marc's power play. He knew 100% what he was doing. I don't really fully. I think Gresini factory bike was the backup option if he didn't get what he wanted. But I have no doubts that he knew exactly what he was gunning for when he made those statements. At the Mugello weekend, that it's not going to Pramac. That's it. And I guess this was the fear. This was the thing Ducati was warned about when they finally kind of agreed to let him join the stable this year, was that he will disrupt things. And sure enough, he's taken 2 factory bikes off the grid. He's punted Jorge Martin to an Aprilia bike that is not going to be fighting for the championship next year. The rest of the Ducati stable is probably the weakest it's been for a long time.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of made his job easier if he's going to be gunning for the championship. That really, if you look at this year's form, in theory, then that's only one of the current Ducati stable who's going to be that step above the rest, along with him, which is his teammate. And we know that Marc is very adept at beating his teammates. So I think this was probably inevitable, but maybe a Ducati just been a bit. Ducati need to be a bit smarter when it comes to things, because it's not the first time we've seen them fumble big opportunities. We know the treatment of Casey Stoner, and they're looking at trying to bring Jorge Lorenzo over 2011, force him to walk away. We know they lost him from the test team again because they kind of didn't really give him what he was looking for. The clash of egos with Gigi and Dovi lost in that. There's Ducati been in this situation before where they've kind of not quite managed things very well, but ultimately, if Marc wins on the bike next year and dominates and is a champion, then everything's vindicated. So this conversation kind of becomes irrelevant if that's what then happens.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember us doing the podcast back in June. It was that weekend in Mugello really changed everything, didn't it? Because it was almost the shock of Ducati. I can't believe they were so shocked by Marquez's statements about he doesn't want to go to Pramac, and that almost then changed everything, because as we know on the Thursday, Jorge Martin was pretty confident. He was like, oh, they're going to make the right decision and I'm pretty happy with it, sort of thing. And Marquez in that same press conference just was like, well, I'm not going to Pramac. I'll stay at Gresini. If there's no point in moving satellite teams to go to another one. Ducati just kind of have to think that there was a possibility, even I thought about it, maybe could have lost both Martin and Marquez if it had went so bad. But going into 25, we'll see what the test is obviously going to be like. They probably made the right decision, but it could have been a bit worse if they had just not done the, how do I say, be a bit more reactionary than letting it play out the way it did.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the mysteries of the season, really, isn't it? Is why there wasn't that factory bike option for Marquez, because he did leave the door open on that, didn't he? I mean, Martin was always clear, wasn't he? If I don't get the factory seat, I've been overlooked once. If I don't get it this time, I'm going elsewhere. So we knew exactly where he stood on that. Ducati knew where he stood on that. But Marc was leaving this option open for Ducati. Yeah. He wasn't giving them that kind of ultimatum of, look, or at least not publicly, that if I don't get this seat, then I'm moving on. He said, I'll take the factory bike at Gresini. And as Lewis said, that option, though, never really came about. It was only ever factory bike at Pramac, and Marc immediately ruled that out. So, yeah, it's one of the mysteries there, isn't it? And they put their eggs in the Marquez basket. And let's be honest, when Pecco was doing well mid-season and then Marc started winning races, it was all looking great. But now potentially we are looking at Martin leaving with the number one plate to Aprilia. And it's we were actually talking last week, weren't we? It's quite rare in the motorsport world to have a young champion who leaves because the factory don't want him or their employer chooses to hire somebody else. It's pretty rare that situation occurs, and it's Aprilia's gain one way or the other. I mean, Martin is obviously, as we've seen this year, he's grown so much on the mental side, if nothing else. The speed is still there, but they're getting a great rider, but and potentially the reigning champion. So. Yeah, it's a big loss for them, but all credit to Ducati, as you guys raised earlier as well. They have been fair as far as giving Martin the machinery to fight for this championship. There were whispers, this is going to be difficult for him now that they know he's leaving. But Gigi has always said, look, this is a sporting competition. I'm not going to interfere, and I've certainly not heard any whispers that Martin hasn't got as much support as earlier in the year. We also know, don't we, from the Misano test, Pecco tried that chassis for 25, really liked it, was like, great guys, give it to me now. When they were, sorry Pecco, no updates for anybody this year. So they've kept they put sort of a lock on the updates, haven't they, to just leave the riders to fight it out. And here we are, unfortunately for Ducati, as in the factory team, they're in a difficult situation now because Martin obviously holds the upper hand. But in fairness to them, they have stuck to their word on that. So, but as I say, I think this is something that will be talked about also in the future, looking back of, if Martin does win this championship, how did Ducati let him go?
Yeah, it'll be strange if you just read it on paper, wouldn't it? That sort of thing. But the story behind it's completely, there's so many different variables in there. And a good point Pete says, Lewis, about Martin's leaving, right, at the end. On Sunday, no matter what, he's gone to a different manufacturer, champion or not. How do you think he will be mentally this weekend in terms of thinking about how Ducati are just doing their job always as normal with them? It'll be strange for him because it's like he's all he's ever really knew about MotoGP, and he's having the biggest moment of his life potentially, and then it's all new again. It's not continuing the story. It's a very rare story at MotoGP, one that I really can't think of, to be honest, for anyone else.
No, I'm struggling to think off the top of my head for a similar kind of scenario, really. I mean, the fear is that perhaps adds a bit more pressure onto Martin's plate, because he must be looking at the Aprilia's performance right now and must be looking at the fact, they've lost Albessiano, they're losing Aleix, as in any capacity, and that is we're yet to it's going to take a year or so really before we see what Sterlachini's influence is going to be in that project. This isn't a weaker Aprilia project than it was, at the start of the year, really. So you do wonder, is in the back of his mind, is he looking at this as, well, this is going to be my last chance until probably the rule cycle changes again. That there is that dynamic that he will have to shut out, and Pramac are going to have to really sit down with him and go, look, you need to block all of that out, focus session by session, lap by lap. This team is behind you, Ducati's behind you, do not focus beyond Sunday.
Yeah.
We know he's been working with a sports psychologist this year. Gino Borsoi says he's been working with a sports psychologist as well. So clearly this team has been working on a lot of outside elements from the track to try and just strengthen things. And I think, that's shown in the consistency we've seen from team and rider in the second half of the championship. But I would be surprised if he doesn't win this championship and then isn't feeling just a little bit kind of sad at the situation, because I remember last year we got to championship decider day and we knew that had he won the championship he was going to be going to the factory Ducati team, and I asked him the question at the time. I said, look, we know you were going to be stepping up, what more can you do? And he was like, look, if I haven't done enough to prove my case already, then it's never going to happen. And that comment is now very kind of, it's very prophetic, because it hasn't happened, and that would rankle him a bit, I think, as well. If you're a world champion and you were told you're getting the bike, then you're not getting the bike, you will still look at that and doubt yourself a bit and go, how can I possibly be in this situation? So I'll be very interested to see if he does win the championship this weekend, what the body language is like, and we'll definitely try and ask a few pointed questions in that sort of direction to see what the feeling's like.
Yeah, even thinking back to that, I think he said during, I think it was this season at some point, the leathers were waiting in the back of my motorhome. He had the Ducati leathers waiting, well, the test leathers. Like that, just think of how close he could have got to a seat last year if he had won the title, and the way it's all just changed. It's a really interesting story, and it's something I think that I don't think it'll ever happen again, really, to be honest. It's so strange, isn't it, Pete?
It is, and the only thing I would also say is, you know what? I wouldn't be shocked if in a few years' time there's a phone call coming back to Martin from Bologna, just inquiring about his contract situation for the future. I mean, he's still young enough. That's what we can say. Who knows? In a couple of years' time, as you say, when the rules change, Ducati are not going to forget this year that Martin's done. Whatever happens this weekend, he's shown that he's a real class rider, and at such a young age. Let's see where he goes, from here. But certainly, I think that is the other angle on this. Is it might not all be over there. There is still time in his career anyway for at least a few more contracts and therefore a few more bike changes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see what happens this weekend. And I asked a question. It was really nice by a listener. He said, "Can you pick the best win this season from each Martin and Bagnaia? Where do you think it was?" I'll go first if you want to have time to think. Well, for me, I think Bagnaia's best win, there's two in my head. I have the one in Buriram, which I thought was to show that the pressure he had to deliver under. I said he did it. I also think back to the start of the year, I think that race with Marc Marquez and Jerez, I thought that was, a little bit of a reminder. People thought Bagnaia would maybe get booted by Marquez, and he's shown them that he was willing to race hard with him, and everything that happened in Portimao and stuff. It was a great battle between those two. So overall, I think it will be Jerez for me for Bagnaia. For Jorge Martin, he's only had, I think it's 3 Grand Prix wins, but obviously a lot of sprint wins. There's two. The sprint win that he had, I think it was the Mazzano, the first one where he got an unbelievable start and he just controlled it. That was a fantastic marker to show you that for this second half of the year that I think he's been quicker than Bagnaia, and that proved it to me. But also the one in Le Mans, I think it was the one he got the most emotional about. You could see the celebrations and stuff, and how he was able to hold off Bagnaia and Marquez. That was one of the standout races for me of the year. So I think Grand Prix wise, it would be that in Le Mans for me. Lewis, who do you think, or what race do you think's their best for this year?
People are going to accuse me of recency bias, which is a term I really hate, because of you can only judge things. You can only judge things based on what has happened recently. I think if you look at just the way from Martin, I think for me that Indonesian Grand Prix win, he had this crash in the sprint that he didn't really understand, and it was at a track that a year ago where kind of his championship challenge really unraveled, and I think there was and he said himself, there was I was really worried, there was lots of ghosts, there was lots of anxiety about crashing again, and he came through that and completed it. At no point was he kind of, he had this threat from Pedro Acosta, but he had that covered. Bastianini might have put a bit of threat on him later on, but I think he had that covered as well. Pecco was really struggling, and he capitalised on that after that tricky sprint kind of situation. And I think if he does win this championship, we'll look back on that as being one of those key moments where it's like, he's, in terms of that mental resilience that Pete talked about earlier, that was total undeniable proof of it.
Yeah.
For Pecco, I mean, yeah, I can see why, he would look at maybe Jerez as maybe being up there as one of Pecco's best rides. I would say though, Sepang, that hard battle that, he had to go for it. He didn't, again, after, crashing out the sprint. And, I think just when we haven't, I don't think, seen Pecco Bagnaia really with his back up against the wall at any point over the past 3 seasons until that point. And he came out swinging, and then, he fended off Martin and gave as good as he got, and then, cleared off into the distance. And that, had it not been for the 8 DNFs, we'd be talking about performances like that as being, proper, true world champion class. But yeah, you can't be doing that and then also have 8 DNFs. That's just, he needs to tidy that up. But yeah, 100% if that, I was to pick a best Grand Prix win for Pecco, and there's been a lot of them, I would say it would be that one.
Yeah. Pete, what's your 2 for both of them?
Yeah, I mean, you guys have explained the reasons behind them, and I think, as you say, for Pecco, let's say, I think in Malaysia, it combines almost the battling of Jerez with the pressure of, say, Buriram, that you must win. Even Marc Marquez the day before, wasn't it, saying Pecco's got to win tomorrow, and he comes out at Buriram in that rain and does it. Malaysia was sort of a combination of those two situations where he had to battle tooth and nail at the start, and he had to win, and he got the job done. But as you guys also say, it might look great in isolation, but then when you look at the fact he made a mistake the day before, and that's why he's in the situation he's in. But if you're just looking at the win, I think, that was, with everything that was on the line so late in the season, which it isn't really. Earlier on, you can take more risk, can't you? And we saw that there's a few clashes, obviously Marquez, Portimao, Jerez, things like that, because there's plenty of time to make the points back. By the time you get to Sepang, there's not enough time left. So yeah, that was a great ride by Pecco. And Martin, as you say, not many Grand Prix wins, but yeah, I think Indonesia was also for me, because it was the response. It was the mistake that we didn't expect, but immediately correcting it. And sort of, stopping that crack of a mistake becoming a great big, sort of cavern of disappearing points, which we saw at Indonesia the previous year had begun, hadn't it? So it was really important for him, I think, to really stamp his authority on that race and say, look, this is not going to happen in the way that it did last year, and all go downhill from here. And I think he's kept it up from there, hasn't he? His consistency and his rides have been almost perfect.
Yeah. That was a good chat, actually. A good question, actually, because they'll have different meanings, those wins. And like you say, you can look back at last year, and then you can even look back at what, say, for example, my pick for the Bagnaia Marquez stuff. What does that lead into for next year? Because obviously Marquez knows how they're going to race. They'll both be in the same bike, same colours. I mean, I wouldn't want to be Ducati management if they're doing that every other weekend. That would be, it'd be great for the fans. So it would, And the last question is, who's going to win the world title? That's it. It's pretty simple. Are we going to get a nice easy weekend, Lewis, or are we going to get something that's really tense?
I think it will be tense. The past couple of championship deciders, I remember being in Valencia, and we kind of went into them I don't think we were super interested in what was like. It wasn't. They weren't great matchups. We kind of thought, well, Pecco had the advantage 2022 over Fabio, and I think we kind of all sort of thought it was going to go Pecco's way against Martin anyway last year. But there was still, when it got to the crunch time, there was all of a sudden there was this wave of nervousness that kind of passed over everyone. And I remember feeling that, thinking, this could actually go kind of anyway. So there will definitely be that. I think you just look at the point situation, you look at what he needs to do. I think Martin, I think it's hard to pick Bagnaia over Martin for that situation, but well, anything can happen. We'll see.
Yeah, Pete, how do you think it's going to go?
Yeah, I think on paper you've got to say at this stage that Martin is the clear favourite. I will say I think it'll go to Sunday. Let's say that. I think that Pecco might,
Yeah.
if he repeats what he does at Sepang, just throws everything at the start of the sprint, I think that, if he gets the upper hand, obviously it also depends on qualifying, the start and everything else, but I think there might come a point where, a bit like we saw at Sepang, when Martin says, okay, I'll take the points here and take a very strong lead into Sunday, when, as Lewis said, despite the big points lead, it'll still be tense because you just don't know, do you? But yeah, so I think Pecco the battle again, at least on the Saturday, but Martin the wall.
Yeah, I think the exact same as you, Pete. I think I'll go to Sunday, but I think it'll be sort of pretty much by half race. I think we'll know by then what the situation will be. I think Jorge Martin will do it, and yeah, it'll be moments of tense. The atmosphere, I imagine, will be really tense. But like I say, I also forgot to mention, just to end it on, the Grand Prix has been named the Moto Solidarity Grand Prix of Barcelona. So solidarity in terms for Valencia, and yeah, I think very much we'll see it this weekend. It'll be a real sort of effort for support for Valencia over the whole. All classes will have things I'm sure they want to give tribute to and stuff. So yeah, I think there's the tickets and stuff are on sale. I don't know how close they are to being sold out, but yeah, if you're in that region and you have a free weekend, why not try and get the MotoGP? And yeah, hopefully we get a good weekend, and like I say, we'll be here to talk about it, and then they'll be straight into 2025 chat. We'll have the test, of course, we'll have all that covered, and yeah, look forward to a long winter where we can just discuss how things are going to be before we get underway in 2025 again. But yeah, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe, like the video if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until then, we'll see you next time.